Are these people some of the smartest gold diggers around? Number 8. Brittany Renner. Back in 2020, Instagram model Brittany Renner married NBA star PJ Washington, a union between two types of people that goes as well as peanut butter and jelly. But it also seems that professional athletes are a pretty standard target for gold diggers from Instagram. So, was this true love, or was this gold digging? Surprise, surprise. 2 weeks after having a kid with him, she filed for divorce, allegedly receiving $200,000 in child support every month. That's a truly crazy number, especially for such a short relationship. The two met at a game at the University of Kentucky before his NBA career. Maybe she was acting like a talent scout, making sure that her future husband would make it into the NBA. After the messy breakup, Washington made a bunch of vague tweets that were almost certainly about Brittany. He wrote about how he can't stand liars and that you'll always reap what you sow. In 2018, Renner posted a video saying that you'll get a lot of money if you get with an athlete because they're dumb. Her words, not ours. If only someone had shown Washington this video before he ended up marrying her, he could have saved himself a lot of money. Hall of Fame NFL player Deion Sanders, who coaches at Jackson State University, had Renner talk with his players. Renner told them to scrutinize their relationships from this point forward in what was basically a watch out for gold diggers talk. Everybody has a motive. Number 7. Amy Irving. Amy Irving is an actress who starred in the original version of Carrie and the Oscar-winning Amadeus. She was going to be in Raiders of the Lost Ark as well, but breaking up with her then-boyfriend Steven Spielberg kind of messed that up. However, they worked out their problems and ended up getting married in 1985. Sadly, their marriage only lasted 4 years. Spielberg thought he could get out of giving her half his money because they signed a prenup, but this wasn't a normal agreement. Nope, they wrote their prenup on a napkin. The couple signed the napkin, but the judge didn't consider it legally binding. She ended up walking with $100 million in the divorce. In an interview, Irving said she didn't enjoy being married to someone as famous as Spielberg, saying it was like being married to a politician. A few years after divorcing him, she married another director, Bruno Barreto. Their marriage lasted 9 years, and then she moved on to her third director husband, Kenneth Bowser Jr. She definitely has a type, and if you're an actress, it can't hurt your career to have your type be famous directors. Number 6. Gabriel Aubry. In 2014, a judge ordered Halle Berry to pay child support to her ex, Canadian model Gabriel Aubry. She originally had to pay him $16,000 a month, which equals to $192,000 a year. He was basically making as much as a doctor because he broke up with Halle Berry. After some legal negotiation, Aubry only got $8,000 a month instead. His free money was cut in half, but he was still getting more than most people ever get for their actual job. Berry also had to pay him a retroactive support payment of $85,000. On social media, Berry has described these huge child support payments as extortion. The two of them had what can only be described as a wild breakup. Berry's then-fiancé, Oliver Martinez, performed a citizen's arrest on Aubry. He and Berry also got a restraining order that prevented Aubry from coming within 100 yards of them or their daughter. To get back at them, Aubry got his own restraining order. The custody battle heated up when, according to Aubry, Martinez threatened to take his life if Aubry didn't let him move to France with Berry. Audrey obviously didn't want them to move to France since it would mean seeing his kid less. Hopefully, all of that drama is in the past as Berry is currently with singer Van Hunt. Number 5. Ellen Nordegren. Ellen Nordegren's divorce from Tiger Woods in 2009 was a massive media event. Woods admitted to cheating on her after his car accident and publicly announced that he was retiring from golf to focus on his marriage. He must not have focused enough because they still ended up getting divorced. Nordegren's sister, who's a lawyer in Sweden, helped her win $100 million from Tiger. She spent $12 million of that to buy a massive mansion in Florida. After Tiger, Nordegren started dating Chris Klein, a billionaire oil tycoon. He was 22 years older than her, so there were some questions about her intentions. Was she dating him for his good looks and charming personality? We don't know. Unfortunately, Klein died in a helicopter crash in 2019. Nordegren's next man was NFL player Jordan Cameron. Number 4. Kim Kardashian. Clearly, Kim is mega rich today, but that wasn't always the case. Back in May 2011, Kim Kardashian got engaged to NBA player Kris Humphries. He was playing for the Nets at the time, and they'd been dating since October 2010. They got married on August 20th. Ever the savvy businesswoman, Kim released a wedding-themed perfume called Kim Kardashian Love at the same time. The wedding was also accompanied by a two-part TV special all about the preparation and the actual ceremony itself. Most people lose money on their wedding, but Kim profited off the whole thing. After just 72 days of marriage, Kim filed for divorce, claiming they simply had their differences. What were these differences that she didn't notice 72 days prior? The world may never know. Many people at the time said that the whole thing was a publicity stunt to promote the Kardashian brand and reality show. If that was the case, then it worked. A man who claimed to be Kim's former publicist, Jonathan Jackson, supported the theory that it was all for publicity. His name, like Kardashian's, has alliteration, so maybe he's telling the truth. He came out and said that the whole thing was staged and was just for money. Kim responded by filing a lawsuit against him and saying he was lying. They settled the case and Jackson publicly apologized. But that doesn't necessarily mean he wasn't telling the truth. After the 72-day marriage, a petition circulated around the internet trying to remove all Kardashian-related programming from the airwaves. It didn't work, although we're sure some people wish it had. Number 3. Crystal Harris. In January of 2009, Crystal Harris began dating someone who was 60 years older than her, Mr. Playboy himself, Hugh Hefner. He was 83 at the time and she was only 23. When she was born in 1986, he was already a 60-year-old man. Was this gold digging at its finest? Crystal was Hefner's third wife, but she almost wasn't his wife at all. Just 5 days before their planned wedding, she suddenly and unexpectedly broke off the engagement. But they ended up working it out and got married anyway. It would have been awkward if they hadn't gotten married, since that month's issue of Playboy had the headline, "Introducing Mrs. Crystal Hefner." The two remained married until Hefner died in 2017. Crystal wasn't in Hugh Hefner's will, and they had a prenup, which meant she was unlikely to get anything if they had divorced. But because they were married at the time of his death, she was still entitled to a pretty big payout. She got $7 million and inherited a $5 million house in Hollywood Hills that he had left in a trust for her. The rest of his $45 million fortune was split between his kids and different charities. Crystal has always maintained in interviews that she married Hefner because they were in love, and money had nothing to do with it. The public has been understandably skeptical of this version of their relationship. Number 2. Oriane Sive. Oriane Sive and her ex-husband Phil Collins have not had the most graceful divorce. They were married from 1999 to 2006. Then they got back together from 2016 to 2019. Then they broke up again. It's been a roller coaster, and their latest legal battle is over their Miami mansion. Phil Collins attempted to have Sive kicked out of the mansion in 2020 after he discovered that she had secretly remarried and moved her new husband into the mansion. Understandably, Collins didn't want a strange man living in his house. She argued that since she had lived there for 6 years, it was just as much her house as it is his, even though he's the one who actually bought it. Sive refused to leave and claimed that she was entitled to half of the mansion's value under a verbal cohabitation agreement. Unlike written agreements, these sorts of verbal agreements can be a lot trickier to verify. In her official filings with the court, Sive included a variety of insults aimed at Collins, including remarks about his hygiene and performance in the bedroom. However, a judge ordered her comments removed from the record. Besides, social media is a better place for that sort of thing, not official legal documents. Phil Collins paid Sive $47 million in their official divorce settlement. But this must not have been enough, seeing as how she's after the mansion as well. However, she's not in desperate need of a house. She already has her own $5.5 million property in Fort Lauderdale. It has 6 bedrooms, a pool, a spa, a home theater, and a dock that's so big you can park a 90-foot yacht right by the house. Her new man, Tom Bates, has worried that his own musical career will live forever in Collins' shadow. Bates said that he's actually a lifelong Collins fan and has nothing but respect for him. Collins fans may not necessarily share this love, however. The two of them didn't stay married for long. They got divorced in 2020. Sive blamed the pandemic, claiming the emotional stress of quarantine caused her to act out of character. Number 1. Evelyn Lozada. In a radio interview, former NBA player Antoine Walker claimed that his longtime girlfriend Evelyn Lozada wasn't what the public thought she was. Lozada, a star on the reality show Basketball Wives, benefited from his NBA career. She and her family got plenty of perks because she was dating someone who made $100 million playing basketball. But, according to Walker, when he lost all his money in the 2008 financial crash, she broke up with him. He realized she might not have been dating him for his charming personality. They started dating in 1999, and she became famous in her own right by being on Basketball Wives. After this interview came out, Lozada said that she wasn't just dating him for the money. On Twitter, she said that he needed to move on and that she broke up with him because he was cheating. However, her romantic life after Walker does seem to indicate that she has a type, that type being rich athletes. She was married to NFL star Chad Johnson, aka Chad Ochocinco, for less than 1 year. They were together from July 2012 to September 2012. After that, she moved on to her third sport when she began dating baseball player Carl Crawford in 2013. In December of 2013, they announced that they were getting engaged and had a son together the following year. But then, in 2017, they ended up calling off the engagement.
Burton Pugac was born on April 20th, 1927 to immigrant parents. He graduated from City College of New York and got a degree from Brooklyn Law School in 1950. He became a successful negligence lawyer who flaunted his wealth by buying a nightclub, a private plane, and a powder blue Cadillac. His fortune made him a New York City legend. His legacy ballooned when a scandal erupted. At the time, he was dating Miss Linda Riss, who was 10 years younger than him. Linda was a 22-year-old secretary from the Bronx who looked like Elizabeth Taylor when they first met. They stayed together for a while, and Burt was a more than generous boyfriend who treated Linda to the finer things in life. However, Burt had a little secret. Linda broke up with him when she found out Burt was already married with children, including a severely disabled daughter. Linda later got engaged to another man. A jealous Burt couldn't get over the heartbreak. Then, he began sending her threatening voice messages. If he couldn't have her, no one would. He made one final threat, saying that nobody would want her anyway once he was through with her. In 1959, Burt was accused of hiring a group of goons to attack Linda with lye at her home. Lye is a toxic chemical often used in drain cleaners. The attack left Linda blind in one eye and near blind in the other. Linda quickly became known for always wearing her trademark oversized sunglasses to hide her injuries. According to Burt, blinding Linda wasn't the plan. The goons were supposed to scare her, not throw toxic chemicals in her face. He was convicted of paying the men $2,000 for the job and served 14 years out of a 30-year sentence. The felony conviction cost him his freedom, wife, and legal career. But here's the real plot twist. 8 months after Burt's early release in 1974, Linda married him. Her friends in the media were dumbfounded by what Burt called a storybook romance. On the other hand, Linda wanted a special kind of revenge. Burt started working as a paralegal and crusaded against corruption in the justice system. Their unique, two-part love story became the subject of many articles, a book, and a popular 2007 documentary called Crazy Love. But history seemed to repeat itself when in 1997, he was again accused of sending threats to an ex-mistress. Linda and another former mistress took the stand as character witnesses. He was convicted of second-degree harassment, but escaped the more severe charges. He cheated on Linda, but they stayed together. When asked about his previous threats and attacks on Linda, Burt expressed regret and called it a neurotic reaction to a terrible situation. They were happily married until 2013, when Linda died of heart failure. They spent over 40 years together and had no children. Then came Shaman Frawley, also known as Sheila. Sheila and Burt met in 2016 at a deli in Queens. They struck up a conversation and transitioned to romance. In 2015, she separated from her husband William. The two had 4 children, so they decided to stay married for health insurance purposes. In short, they were both strapped for cash. Sheila and her husband had an amicable breakup and continued to raise their children together. Meanwhile, Sheila was 41 years younger than Burt, and she quickly took on the role of his caregiver. Sheila began a relationship with Burt and used romantic leverage to inherit his entire fortune. She apparently demanded money and threatened to leave him unless he signed over the fortune to her. In 2020, a stroke left Burt paralyzed on his left side and landed him in the hospital. It was then and there that Sheila assumed the role of caretaker. She brought him into her home and kept him there. In fact, he was so dependent on her that he started calling her Mommy. Sheila was accused of taking advantage of Bert's confusion to forge his signature and steal money from his and Linda's charity for the blind. By then, Bert had suffered too many strokes to realize what was happening. Sheila named herself and her family the sole beneficiaries of his fortune in his will. Once she got what she wanted, Sheila withheld food, water, and medication from him. Bert passed away on Christmas Eve, 2020. Sheila's attorney, Jonathan Strauss, argued that these manipulation claims were utterly bogus. Sheila loved Bert deeply, and Bert wrote her into his will when he realized Sheila was the only person left who truly cared for him. Strauss called the allegations baseless and despicable. His clients would never try to swindle anyone, especially an elderly man. Of course, everyone looked at the age gap between Sheila and Bert and smelled something fishy. Where there's smoke, there's fire. Where there's a 40-year age gap and lots of money is involved, there's usually a gold digger. Strauss argued that Bert, and nobody but Bert, wrote the most recent version of his will. He wanted to give Sheila and her family the rest of his estate, a decision he came to on his own accord. He also claimed that Sheila was allowed to withdraw money from Bert's account to cover the funeral expenses. While Bert's friends blamed his passing on Sheila, his death certificate cited natural causes. There are also multiple tapes where Bert admits his undying love and adoration for Sheila. Even though Sheila and William probably recorded Bert without his consent, it was to prove his friends were just after his money, not the Frawleys. According to Strauss, Bert and Linda's charitable foundation was set up for tax purposes anyway. None of the plaintiffs are Bert's children or relatives, so they aren't entitled to any of his estate. Sheila's camp said the plaintiffs are just trying to acquire Bert's millions by pretending to care for him and assuming what his wishes would be. They are wrongfully blaming his romantic partner and only caregiver for his passing. Before Sheila met Bert in 2016, her husband William came out as gay. He separated from his wife and began a relationship with another man. William gave Sheila his blessing to sleep with Bert, who was more than 4 decades her senior. The lawsuit claims that William turned a blind eye to his wife's new relationship because he was in on the ploy to scam her vulnerable new lover. To make matters even stranger, William and Sheila were allegedly still living together while separated, which allowed them to easily conspire to get Bert's fortune. They continued to deny any wrongdoing, with Sheila saying her 31-year marriage to William was definitively over and she began her loving relationship with Bert. William began living his life as a gay man in 2014, but neither of them filed for divorce until October 2020. The attorney for Bert's estate, William Thomas, had no doubt that William was in on the scam. He claims that William knew that his estranged wife was intimate with the ailing Bert and encouraged their relationship. Thomas says that Bert was instantly smitten with the young, beautiful Sheila, who used her beauty to manipulate the vulnerable old man. He was so confused at times that he thought Babe Ruth was still playing for the Yankees. Thomas also alleges that William and his son Nicholas used their NYPD intel to invade Bert's privacy and gain confidential information. They secretly installed surveillance equipment to eavesdrop on his private conversations. Then things got even more suspicious in 2020. Remember, Bert's will changed for the final time in October 2020. Coincidentally, Sheila officially filed for divorce from William in the same month. They had 5 years to settle the paperwork, so why now? Sounds like a scam. After his stroke, Bert moved in with Sheila, and she cared for him 24/7. He left his home of 40 years to move into the first floor of Sheila's apartment in Queens. Then William told Bert that he was Sheila's father and not her husband to keep up the lie that Sheila was single. Bert believed he'd recover one day and eventually move back to his own house. Sheila, of course, had different plans. Bert wasn't going anywhere. He was her prisoner, and she would keep it that way. She apparently isolated him from his friends and made him dependent on her for meals, medicine, and hygiene. Then, Sheila allegedly coerced him into changing his will. Between 2013 to 2020, Bert changed his will 5 times. Each time, he left the bulk of his fortune to his foundation for the blind. Except for the last time. In October 2020, he suddenly and suspiciously left all $15 million to Sheila and William. William denied any involvement when people accused him of being in on it. The last time he was intimate with Sheila was in 2013. He came out as gay in 2015 and moved on with his life, never scamming anybody for anything. Sheila backed his story, saying there was no evil collaboration to steal Bert's money. The day Bert died, a mysterious $150,000 transfer was sent to an anonymous savings account from Bert's account. His friends caught wind of this and immediately contacted the courts. New York State Supreme Court Judge Joseph Rizzi froze his assets and granted Bert's friends a temporary injunction. Bert's former attorney, Peter Gordon, his wife Maris, and Bert's friends Joel Jacobowitz, Tal Priel, and Cindy Weiss claim undue influence, unjust enrichment, and disgorgement. Someone was trying to steal Bert's money, and they had a good idea of who. Before Bert changed his will in October, the Gordons, Joel, and the Blindness Foundation were poised to receive some cash. The Gordons were getting $1 million, Joel expected $5 million, and the foundation would get just over $10.5 million. They admitted that Sheila did seem to care for Bert, but only to serve her own greed. She was due to receive $5 million until the final edit granted her everything. The suit demanded $15 million in damages. In addition to the friends previously listed in his will, TD Ameritrade, Charles Schwab, JP Morgan, TD Bank, and Merrill Lynch were all listed as defendants in the case because they hold pieces of Bert's fortune. Meanwhile, Bert's physical therapist saw nothing wrong with Bert and Sheila's relationship. The latest court filings include an affidavit from Dr. Gregors Wolski, who treated Bert regularly after he suffered from a stroke. Dr. Wolski said he noticed nothing but compassion and loving care from Sheila. At no point did he think Bert was being coerced or controlled by anyone. Bert loved Sheila. None of the Frawleys were willing to talk to reporters about the case. Sheila's story fizzled out after March 2021. Whether or not she settled with Bert's family outside of court remains a mystery. As of May 2022, we still don't know who finally got their hands on Bert's $15 million fortune. Rachel Lee operated her own little psychic shop in Oregon. As it turns out, you can make a decent living by looking into crystal balls and telling people about their fortunes. While she wasn't exactly living in the lap of luxury, Lee and her family were living comfortably in the city of Canby off the back of her shop's earnings. But living well wasn't good enough for Lee as the years went on. The middle-class psychic had her sights set on greener pastures, it seems, and that's what prompted her to go from fortune-telling to fortune-stealing. Without even flinching, Lee found the perfect target for the scam she was concocting when Ralph Raines Jr. waltzed into her shop one day. Raines was the latest in a line of wealthy Oregon tree farmers. He and his family operated a timber empire for generations, ever since his father planted the first tree on their farm many years ago. What was once a modest family business had since multiplied into a sprawling 1,200-acre farm worth millions of dollars. In fact, some of the more mature trees on the Raines property are worth up to $1,000 each. It was Ralph Jr.'s turn to take the reins of the family farm. But there was just one problem. He was a lonely old bachelor and had been for most of his 57 years of life. If Ralph never found love, the family business would die with him. That was something Ralph thought long and hard about as he spent his days looking after his dying dad at their Gaston estate. Estate may be giving too much credit to what was ultimately described as a dilapidated house in the rural Portland suburb. Even though the Raines family had money to spare thanks to the lucrative timber business, they weren't the kind of people to flaunt their wealth to the rest of the world. They were historically reserved in their spending, always careful not to let their massive fortune go to waste on luxury cars or showy mansions. But it seemed almost inevitable that Ralph was destined to take a different path. Ralph Sr. had always been hard on his son, and while Ralph Jr. wasn't going to leave his sick father to wither away by his lonesome, serving as his old man's caretaker wasn't the fulfilling existence he was looking for either. He lacked meaningful human connections, which he ultimately craved far more than money. Having always held a particular interest in all things paranormal, Ralph spent a lot of his free time reveling in the world of the occult. Ralph's hobby frequently took him to the various psychic shops in the area. In 2004, he stopped by a shop owned by none other than, you guessed it, Rachel Lee. During his initial visit, the two formed an instant bond. As someone who desperately sought some companionship in his life, Ralph was immediately drawn to Lee and thought he had found a true friend. However, Rachel saw an opportunity to pounce on a lonely man's vulnerability. Ralph constantly returned to Lee's shop for the next couple of years. He believed he was nurturing a beautiful friendship with the woman. He began revealing intimate details about his life, sharing secrets he'd never uttered to a living soul before. The pair became so close that Ralph started not only sharing his emotions, but also his money. He wasn't shy about using his abundant wealth for the benefit of his new friend. On Valentine's Day of 2006, he dipped into his bank account to buy Lee a $1 million mansion in Portland's West Hills. The fortune teller had talked Ralph into investing in real estate in the first place, and now she had a beautiful new home to call her own. Lee did her absolute best to maintain the illusion that she and Ralph were friends. In reality, she was scheming to take the millionaire tree farmer for every cent he had. The fancy mansion was just the beginning. After Ralph confided in her about looking after his father on his deathbed, Lee made up a little backstory of her own. She claimed to be a widow who'd helped her late husband with the bookkeeping for his auto repair shop before his death. Of course, this was a lie, but it made Ralph feel like Lee was someone who understood what he was going through. It also gave him the confidence to let her work in his family's business. She also got him to employ her longtime boyfriend, Blancy Lee, who started doing odd jobs around the Rains Gaston home, while Rachel Lee took over as Ralph Sr.'s full-time caretaker. Lee had now planted herself within the Rains estate, bringing her that much closer to getting her hands on Ralph's money. He didn't suspect his new best pal's devious plot even for a second, which was why he eventually gave Lee power of attorney, also known as full control over the family's financial affairs. Lee's plan was all coming together. She helped herself to some of Ralph's cash, even using his financial means to expand her own business. She opened up additional psychic shops in Bend, Scappoose, and Portland. Ralph didn't comprehend the fact that Lee was literally stealing money out from under his nose. He was just happy to have someone in his life besides his sick old dad. The next phase of Lee's plan came to fruition in 2007 when the psychic recruited her teenage daughter to participate in the ruse. 17-year-old Portia Lee was brought into the fold to portray a character entirely of her mother's design. Outfitted in a blonde wig and plenty of makeup, Portia pretended to be a young British lass named Mary Marks. Fun fact, the name Marks belonged to Rachel Lee's biological mother. Ralph had just flown back to Oregon after attending a tree farm convention when he met Miss Mark for the first time. While he was waiting for Rachel to pick him up at the airport, Portia walked up to the bench he was sitting at and asked him if his name was Ralph. Although he was understandably confused, Portia went on to explain that she had always been gifted with psychic abilities. She told Ralph his name, birthday, and tons of other extremely personal information that no stranger would have known. Who was this mystery woman who already knew so much about him? Rachel spoon-fed Portia everything she knew about Ralph. Ralph, being the paranormal nut he was, believed every word she said. The two made plans to meet again, and the Lee family had successfully planted yet another seed of deception. Portia wiggled her way into Ralph's life much like her mother did before. To keep the charade alive, the two women pretended not to know each other. Behind closed doors, they were plotting the next step of the master plan. That next step involved convincing Ralph to marry Portia, who was a whole 40 years younger than him. She claimed she needed her green card to avoid deportation, and Ralph agreed to elope with her. Ralph's bookkeeper, aka Rachel Lee, made the official arrangements, making sure the marriage papers were believable enough to get Ralph to sign them without them being legally binding documents. Ralph believed he was married to the woman he knew as Mary Marks. In actuality, his supposed wife was secretly his close confidant's daughter, and the two were very close to taking his multi-million-dollar fortune right out from under him. In November of 2010, Ralph gave the house in West Hills to his fake wife. It wasn't long before Portia opened up the bank account where she'd hide the cash they were stealing. The mother-daughter team ran into a bit of a problem when Portia became pregnant with an uninvolved man's child. To cover it up, they came up with yet another lie. They planned to trick Ralph into agreeing to let Portia bear his child. Ralph was under the impression that his wife was going to become pregnant through in vitro fertilization. Once she gave birth, he'd signed the keys to the Rains Tree Farm Kingdom over to his new heir. Portia named the baby Giorgio Armani and told Ralph he was the child's father. Rachel then started looking after Giorgio, who was her grandson, at the mansion in West Hills. The Lees knew no bounds when manipulating this lonely man, and the lying wasn't done yet either. Giorgio was eventually given back to his real father, at which point Portia needed to find a stand-in baby to keep Ralph from catching on to their lies. She borrowed her sister's kid, an unknowing accomplice in an increasingly complicated scam. In 2012, Portia pretended to become pregnant with Ralph's second child, a daughter named Gloria Jean. As far as Ralph was concerned, he'd gotten everything he'd ever wanted. The years he spent all alone were in the rear-view mirror now. He had a pregnant wife, a close friend and confidant, and perhaps most importantly, someone to pass along his fortune to. But it wasn't his son who took ownership of his precious inheritance. It was the two women who'd been lying to him for years and were about to break his heart with the cold, hard truth. As 2012 was coming to a close, Rachel Lee was finalizing the liquidation of all of the assets and properties belonging to the Rains family and their business. She sold every last acre of the Rains tree farm and told Ralph that he was dirt broke. Before Ralph even knew what hit him, Portia and Rachel were on their way to lavish vacations in Vegas and Beverly Hills with his money in their pockets. They went on insane shopping sprees with the money they'd slowly and meticulously stolen. Rachel and Blancy went out and bought a pair of luxury cars for themselves. Those fancy cars would prove to be the scammers' undoing. A detective noticed them parked in their Canby driveway and thought it odd that a supposedly middle-class psychic would have the disposable income to splurge on such high-priced luxuries. After doing a little more digging into the Lee family and their association with Ralph Rains Jr., investigators began to piece together details about the long-running fraud that had cost the tree farmer his very livelihood. Thankfully, investigators stepped in when they did. By this point, Ralph was still blissfully unaware of what was going on. He took Rachel at her word when she said she had to sell his farm to cover his inheritance tax. One final lie to put the finishing touches on the 10-year-old scam. Police executed a raid on one of Lee's psychic shops. They found mounds of evidence that incriminated the con artist and her family. Just as the scammers were planning their grand escape, they were arrested on May 8th of 2014. Rachel, Portia, and Blancy Lee were charged with money laundering and other financial crimes that sent them directly to prison. As the fraudsters were spending their days behind bars, Ralph was left to pick up the pieces of his shattered life. By all accounts, he tried to keep a positive spin on things. He said he cherishes the good memories with Rachel and Portia, and he even desired to remain a part of his fake son's life. Even though the serial liars had taken his $15 million fortune and turned it into just $200,000 in the blink of an eye, Ralph Rains still didn't view the Lees as his enemies. He went as far as to write a letter to the scammers' prosecutors insisting that he was not a victim in the situation. If getting lied to every single day for 10 years and then swindled out of millions and millions of dollars doesn't make you a victim, then surely nothing would. When James's car arrived at the Villa Otrada restaurant in Ukraine, he could hardly contain his excitement. James, a 52-year-old charity worker, was about to marry the love of his life, Irina, who was 20 years his junior. He had been waiting for this moment for several months. It was summer 2017, the beginning of a long, hot season in Odessa, Ukraine. A beautiful scene was set as tables and chairs lined the terrace overlooking the Black Sea as 60 guests arrived at the ceremony. James and Irina exchanged vows beneath an archway adorned with flowers in a dreamy sequence of events. But the wedding was far from perfect. Hours later, James sat alone in a hospital bed because he had been drugged. Oh, and James never married Irina. He married the couple's wedding planner. James lost most of his life savings in this scam, along with who he thought was the love of his life. Ukraine's unsteady economy leaves tensions running high as the people constantly search for financial stability. There's a big division between proud Ukrainian nationalists and those who value their Russian ties. With an average monthly wage of about $350, Ukraine is one of Europe's poorest countries. And clearly, there's the entire mess that's going on right now in Ukraine. Amidst the economic upheaval in the country, some women have sought refuge in bank accounts of Western men who flock to Odessa in search of beautiful brides. In fact, internet romance is now a booming industry in Ukraine, one that the economy has come to rely on. Odessa is like headquarters for internet brides, and Western men flock from far and wide to meet their brides-to-be they found on the web. Walking down the streets of Odessa, you'll likely see an older white man dining with a young Ukrainian woman alongside a pile of designer gifts. First meetings are often awkward dates facilitated by translators at fancy restaurants. Women spend multiple hours every day in internet cafes searching for prospective suitors. Many of the men are American, but several European and Middle Eastern men look for love in Ukraine. One of the better-known internet romance companies is Anastasia International, which boasts over $140 million in annual revenue. Thousands of women are signed up, many of whom are from Ukraine, but with several international users as well. The website is dedicated to matching lonely bachelors with beautiful brides from anywhere in the world. Once they match, prospective couples can use the platform to facilitate online chats or in-person meetings. The company also organizes staff trips to Ukraine for men hoping to find love. James is so embarrassed by what happened that he's opted not to share his real name with the public. He told his story anonymously to the BBC, who verified it through documents and extensive paperwork. Unlike many Western men who end up with a Ukrainian bride, James did not come to Odessa looking for love. He's a charity worker from the UK who was asked to set up a refuge for children coming from Ukraine's conflict zone in the east in 2015. He enlisted help from a translator named Julia as he commuted between his full-time job in England and his volunteer project in Ukraine. One winter, Odessa experienced heavy snowfall that halted James's volunteer work. Since there was more downtime than usual, Julia suggested that James go on a date with her friend Irina. James and Irina immediately hit it off. She told him about 2 previous failed marriages and that she did not want to marry a Ukrainian man again. They enjoyed evenings on the town with Julia as their awkward third-wheel translator. James paid Julia $150 per day to accompany them, so it wasn't that bad of a gig. Even with a translator between them, James and Julia's chemistry was undeniable. Their communication was easier over text because they used Viber, which is similar to WhatsApp but also has a translation feature. In her messages, she professed her love and thanked James for giving her a fairy tale life. After the grueling winter, James traveled freely between Ukraine and England. For 6 months, he visited Irina each time he went to Odessa. He took her to expensive dinners and fancy nights out on the opera house. Any physical displays of affection were off limits, even kissing. Julia was always there, and Irina said she did not believe in premarital activities. James didn't mind. He was awed by her moral standards. 11 months after their first date, James popped the question after some persuasion from Julia and Irina. In November 2016, the couple held an engagement party at Villa Otrada, the same venue as their inevitable wedding. They played Whitney Houston's Could I Have This Kiss Forever as they swayed slowly on the dance floor and glitter fell from the ceiling. James was in love with Irina, who felt trapped in Ukraine. He wanted to help, and this wedding was the perfect way to do that. Once they were engaged, James practically bled money for Irina. He paid for her to get English lessons to hopefully make her future move to the UK a bit easier. However, it became clear that even marriage wouldn't make Irina's move to the UK an easy one due to all the legal obstacles. Since she couldn't move to his country, he decided to move to hers. He quit his job in England and sold his house. The couple began looking for a home together in Odessa. But transferring money from England to Ukraine is no easy feat. Ukraine is extremely corrupt and has a repertoire of several high-profile banking scandals. The government puts a cap on international money transfers to avoid money laundering. James wanted to transfer $200,000 to his account in Ukraine to fund his new apartment with Irina, but James did not know how to get around the banking obstacles. Then Irina had an idea. Instead of putting the money in Irina's personal account, she suggested that he transfer the funds to her friend Christina's bank account. Christina was their wedding planner, so a business-looking transfer might not trigger as many red flags. Though a bit wary, James eventually gave in and sent the money to Christina. But things took a very stressful turn. Irina told James that he could only access his $200,000 if he was legally married to Christina. Irina promised that it would just be a formality. Their marriage would be completed in 10 minutes at a registry office, and they could file for divorce shortly after. James was in a bind. Just days before their wedding, Irina threatened to call it off if James did not get his money back and buy a home for them to move into. In text messages, she told him that she would look like a street worker in front of her relatives if she did not have an apartment with him secured by their wedding day. Irina promised that marrying Christina to collect the money, then divorcing her and marrying Irina would be easy. Then, in July 2017, James married wedding planner Christina Stakova. Irina was thrilled. The money was released from Christina's bank account that afternoon. Irina told James that every cent of the $200,000 went towards their shared apartment. James later found that the apartment only cost $60,000. The day after his legal marriage to Christina, James had his wedding with Irina. He planned to proceed with the ceremony and reception as usual and hold off on the legal stuff until his divorce from Christina was finalized. Though Ukraine is cheap, Christina priced the wedding at a costly $20,000. Of course, James paid for everything. What he didn't know was that the entire thing was fake. The 60 guests in attendance were paid to be there, and Christina's itemized expenses were inflated by over 50%. The woman he thought was Irina's mother was actually the translator's mother. Irina already had a husband who she married 3 months before meeting James. Christina already had a husband too, Dennis, who she divorced 3 weeks before her legal marriage to James. Once her and James's divorce went through, she remarried Dennis. On the wedding night, James believes his drink was spiked by the woman he thought was Irina's mother. She kept giving him drinks until he was shaking violently. When he woke up, he was in the hospital bed, alone. Irina refused to go with him, saying that he got too drunk and embarrassed her in front of her family. For the next few weeks, Irina claimed she was dealing with her own medical problems, but would not let James visit her in the hospital. He transferred her $12,000 to cover her medical expenses. Finally, someone intervened. A Ukrainian person told James that his apartment was valued at a mere $63,000. That's when he started putting the pieces together. James realized Christina and Irina had scammed him out of nearly $250,000. His heart was broken. Thankfully, he had all the records of their messages on Viber and copies of the bank documents. He was sure justice would be served. But the Ukrainian justice system does not work like the British justice system. He went to Odessa police, who just laughed in his face. They're dealing with a lot of violence and corruption, so marriage scams are low on their list of priorities. Police in Ukraine are often bribed to get anything done, but James didn't want to do that. Though Christina and Irina were brought in for questioning, no charges were brought against them. The only progress made was that James was declared sole owner of the apartment he legally shared with his bogus wife Christina. Even if he sells it, there's no way he gets near the $200,000 he paid for it. Since the Ukrainian police proved useless, James enlisted the help of Robert Papinian, a private investigator known as Odessa's very own Sherlock Holmes. He had to pay a $3,000 fee up front in addition to 30% of any of the money he recovered. His office in central Odessa is adorned with a gold silhouette of Sherlock Holmes' hat and a pipe and all. Papinian stays true to the theme. He has a Sherlock notepad and a Sherlock business card. Even his ringtone is the theme song to the Soviet version of the beloved TV show. But Papinian is no ordinary investigator. He cites intimidation as one of his methods. He's a former policeman, but doesn't work with the police. Instead, he uses psychological methods. Papinian says that since James's money was stolen, he'd have to use illegal ways of getting it back. The BBC got in touch with Irina and Christina's husbands. Christina's husband complained about a car that was following them relentlessly and called Papinian's men extortionists. Irina's husband denied any knowledge of James. The BBC later found Irina's dating profile still active online, where her bio says that she is a divorced babysitter whose heart will belong to only one man. Papinian told James that his men found Irina by her home in Odessa, allowed her to repay the debt. James doesn't want to get his hopes up. He's simply lost too much. He conceals his identity to protect job prospects. His family doesn't even know what happened. James stays busy with a new charity job and maintains contact with Papinian as he works on the case. James told BBC his story to warn others about engaging with women from Ukraine. But one good thing came from this. England's Foreign Office updated its Ukraine travel advisory to include marriage fraud and extortion. In short, you'll never get your money back.
Israeli Lynn Helena Halfin was charged with fraud against her husband, Richard Rappaport. The fraud allegations say she tried to steal $1 million from him during their brief marriage. Both Rappaport and Halfin refused to provide any information about their marriage, such as how they met. What little we know about their relationship has come from records and interviews. It's believed that Halfin met Rappaport at a benefit or social event in Tampa Bay, Florida. Why? They were first photographed together in February 2019 at a benefit for the Holocaust Museum in the Vinoy Renaissance Hotel in St. Petersburg, Florida. However, we don't know what led both of them to the event. However, investigators do know who Rappaport is and why a good-looking younger woman might want to attend benefits with him. Rappaport is the founder and owner of Panther Medical, a company that distributes medical devices and equipment to the Tampa Bay area. Panther Medical is a highly successful company. At its helm, Rappaport became a millionaire. For the past couple of decades, he supported benefits across Florida, especially causes related to his Jewish heritage, like the Holocaust Museum. Rappaport fell in love with his heritage when he visited Israel as a teenager. The nation had just established itself a few years before Rappaport traveled there. As a young Jewish teen, the first ever Jewish state was something he took immense pride in. When Rappaport started making money through Panther Medical, he donated to different Israeli charity funds. He gave to the Jewish National Fund and supported projects like playgrounds, the Alexander Muss High School, and a rehabilitation center for disabled children. His daughter Titus inherited his passion for Israel and also donated to Israeli national causes. He took Titus there when she was young, and she fell in love with the country as much as he did. Both Titus and her father make massive donations to these charitable organizations. Titus also sits on the board of directors for the Jewish National Fund. And since her father's disastrous marriage to Halfin, she's been at the forefront of media relations. Almost all of the statements on her father's history with Israel came from her. However, she spent most of her time going after Halfin, and not just legally. Titus has said publicly that she believes Halfin took advantage of her father's advanced age. She took the reins after her father failed to file charges against Halfin, who he wanted to give the benefit of the doubt, despite there being overwhelming evidence indicating she tried to steal from him. Titus quickly stepped in and saw the situation for what it was, a scam, though it took a while for her and the police to convince him that Halfin was scamming him. Rappaport was a man in love. He'd found a beautiful young woman from a country he dedicated his life to supporting. He wasn't about to let her go so easily. In the same legal document, he asked that Halfin not be deported back to her native Israel, even though she represented the nation he loves and a new life adventure. Halfin didn't feel the same way. The evidence of theft was overwhelming, and Rappaport couldn't deny that his beautiful young wife was trying to rob him blind. Halfin's first attempt at stealing from Rappaport took place inside a Tampa Amscot Bank branch. 3 months after their August wedding, Halfin walked into the bank building with $1 million Wells Fargo cashier's check. After identifying herself, they invited Halfin to sit down with a bank teller. She explained that these were legitimate checks signed by her husband, who wanted to buy a $1 million yacht with the money. Halfin said Rappaport sent her, his wife, here on his behalf. However, the bank tellers had a protocol. The person whose name was on the check had to be present for them to authorize a cash out. They denied Halfin, and she went home empty-handed. Halfin walked back into the bank a few hours later with 3 new checks. Each one had Rappaport's name on them, along with a $333,000 sum of money. This time, she showed them her Israeli passport and her visa as identification. However, the bank tellers still refused to cash her checks. But before Halfin left, the tellers captured photos of the suspicious woman's passport, her visa, and the 3 checks. Then after Halfin left, the tellers decided to contact the authorities, who started investigating her. Meanwhile, Halfin was back at the drawing board. Her original plan, which was to write her husband's name on $1 million worth of checks, didn't work. She'd have to get more creative. But before she could come up with a better plan, Halfin got a call from Rappaport asking why she tried to cash the checks, followed by an even more important question: where are the checks? Halfin didn't know, but the police looked up Rappaport's contact information and asked him if he'd signed those checks. He, of course, said that was nonsense and didn't know what they were talking about, then called his wife of 4 months. His daughter, Titus, was there in the room with him as Halfin explained herself, though, as Titus recalls, Halfin spent most of the call berating Rappaport for not trusting her enough to handle his money. When he asked for his checks back, she only got angrier. The next day, the police interviewed Rappaport with Titus at his side. That's when he told them he thought Halfin was innocent and that he was giving her the benefit of the doubt. Nevertheless, investigators still found Halfin and interrogated her. They presented the Israeli national with photocopies of her passport, visa, and the checks collected by the bank as evidence. So Halfin told them the truth, her version of the truth. Halfin explained to the investigators that she had to forge the checks. Rappaport's family pressured him to withhold money from her because they thought she was a gold digger. So, to protect herself financially, she tried cashing a few checks. Halfin told police she shipped the checks to her sister in Israel when cashing them didn't work. The police explained that what she did was a crime, and Halfin agreed to ask her sister to send the checks back to Florida. The police decided Halfin's promise was good enough and left. However, it was far from over. Halfin had indeed sent the checks out of Florida, but not to her sister in Israel. In reality, the $333,000 checks were mailed to Orlando. Halfin knew trying to cash the checks herself wouldn't work. She'd have to hire a middleman who knew how to cash forged checks. The mystery person she hired was from Orlando. After Halfin mailed them the checks, they traveled to New Jersey and cashed the first check at a company called Check Pros. Then, 5 days later, they cashed a second check at the same company. However, they never got to cash the third check. Investigators had already been alerted of the first 2 and ordered Wells Fargo to freeze the third. When the news broke out, no one knew who the mystery person from Orlando was. Since they hadn't technically been charged with a crime, no one was at liberty to release their name, a name that remains a mystery to this day. The authorities gathered more evidence and met with Rappaport in December. Even if Rappaport wasn't willing to give her up, they wanted Halfin. They asked him if he'd heard anything from her lately about the checks. Rappaport told police that Halfin was meeting her sister in Boston to pick up the checks. Halfin told him that she had booked a flight to New York on December 15th, and once she returned to Tampa with the checks, everything would be resolved. The police, however, didn't believe the story. They kept questioning Rappaport, asking him if he believed the story. When the investigators poked him some more, Rappaport finally gave in. He admitted Halfin was probably conning him, a truth his daughter tried to convince him of on their wedding day and every day after. The investigators went looking for Halfin. As they dug, they discovered Halfin actually rescheduled her flight for December 16th, most likely hoping to throw off authorities trying to catch her. On the 16th, police investigators sent a squad down to Tampa Bay International Airport and arrested Halfin just before she got on the plane. They brought her into the station for questioning like normal, though there was one tiny problem. Halfin wasn't American. She was staying in the United States on a visa, but wasn't a citizen. So the police detained Halfin for 13 long months while they further investigated her scam, then offered her a plea deal. Halfin accepted the deal and was deported back to Israel as a condition of the plea agreement. You're probably wondering how Halfin got off so easily. She escaped prison time using one of the most bizarre defenses in court history. She blamed her criminal actions on her psychic. Throughout her time in Tampa, Halfin met with a young psychic named J.C. Wasso. In front of the judge, the court, and Rappaport, Halfin claimed Wasso put a spell on her. This spell, Halfin says, caused her to scam Rappaport, not greed. She says Wasso convinced her that stealing from Rappaport was the only option. Wasso also asked Halfin to give her the money and anything else she stole, including some of Rappaport's jewelry. The Florida state prosecutors recorded Halfin's testimony and went after Wasso. They arrested the self-proclaimed psychic and charged her with several crimes. The prosecutors charged Wasso with 7 different counts of grand theft, several counts of fraud, and 1 count of money laundering. They also compiled and submitted 800 pages of evidence to the court. Her attorney, Glenn Lansky, who's known for defending white-collar criminals, says the state refused to offer his client any plea bargains. He said they were throwing the whole deck at her. Whether or not that was a tarot card pun, we can't know for sure. Still, Florida prosecutors went after Wasso, intending to send her to prison for as long as possible. Since they had already deported Halfin, extraditing her to the U.S. wasn't easy. Lansky believes the prosecutors were scapegoating his client because they lost the actual perpetrator. He says that Halfin committed the crimes and admitted to lying over 50 times during a deposition. Nevertheless, Wasso will appear before a judge in the summer of 2022. She's up against a team of prosecutors on a mission to avenge one of Florida's wealthiest and most generous residents. The psychic's future isn't looking too bright, but she probably saw that coming, right?
The royal wedding of Juan Carlos of Spain and Princess Sofia of Greece and Denmark was a giant event back on May 14th of 1962 in Athens. The wedding was a huge merge between 2 world superpowers, leading some to speculate whether this was a marriage of love or power. Let's fast forward a few decades. Juan Carlos and German aristocrat Carina Zu-Sayn-Wittgenstein are both gun enthusiasts. They met at a shooting party in February 2004. The king was having trouble with his shotgun, so Carina helped him. Carina was a business consultant born in Denmark and raised in Germany. She was previously married to Prince Casimir Zu-Sayn-Wittgenstein of Germany, her second husband, but they split in 2005. She opted to keep the name and the princess title. They had an instant connection. Juan Carlos called Carina up to 10 times a day. She met his friends. He met her children. They were both very busy people, but they found time to meet in Madrid and spend time together. Their relationship lasted from 2004 to 2009, but the Spanish public knew nothing about it, believing he was happily married to Queen Sofia. Previous premonitions about the royal and possibly faux love between King Carlos and Queen Sofia were seemingly confirmed by the king when he told his mistress Carina that he and the queen had an arrangement to represent the crown. However, they led totally separate lives. Juan Carlos had established strong support from the Spanish people as the head of state after dictator Francisco Franco died in 1975. He oversaw Spain's transition to democracy after the dark years of the Spanish Civil War. 3 days before Spain's elections in 2004, Al-Qaeda directed a series of train bombings on a commuter train system in Madrid. Juan Carlos responded to the tragedy, attended the vigils, and became a symbol of empathy, leadership, and strength at a vulnerable time in Spain. At the same time, Juan Carlos's and Carina's love was blossoming. In 2008, at the height of their relationship, Spain entered an economic recession alongside the rest of the world. Unemployment was at a staggering 23%, and the Spanish population would have lost their mind if they found out about Carlos's love affair. They starved while he showered his mistress in luxurious gifts. In 2009, King Juan Carlos visited Carina's father and told him of his intention to marry her. He told Carina's father that things were complicated and would take some time, but ultimately wanted him to know that he was very serious about Carina. Some say that the king even consulted a divorce attorney about ending his 40-year marriage to the queen. Karina was an experienced political strategist and foresaw the downfall of her relationship with the king. She predicted that their relationship could seriously damage his reputation as king and destabilize the monarchy. That same year, Karina's father was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and only had a few months to live. She decided to end her relationship with the king to spend time with her father. Juan Carlos shocked Karina with more terrible news after her father's funeral. He had been in a 3-year relationship with another woman, in addition to his relationship with her and his marriage to the queen. Karina mourned the loss of her father and the betrayal of her ex. She was under the impression that she was in a monogamous relationship with the king, aside from Queen Sofia, that is. Karina was devastated and could never forgive him. That's where the story should end, but it doesn't. Though the relationship was over, the pair remained friends. Juan Carlos contacted Karina because he was diagnosed with a tumor that he believed was cancerous. Karina stayed close to him as he navigated his health issues and even slept on the couch next to his hospital bed before surgery. Thankfully, the biopsy showed that the tumor was benign. During this time, Queen Sofia realized how much the king emotionally relied on Karina and directed staff to keep her at a distance. Tensions rose between Karina and the royal family. Juan Carlos' staff asked Karina to leave the hospital. After he was released, however, Karina continued to visit him as he recovered in Madrid. The king brokered a deal with Saudi Arabia to establish a consortium dedicated to building a holy train line connecting Medina to Mecca to minimize travel time for Muslims on their annual pilgrimage to Mecca. A consortium is an agreement between 2 or more parties who decide to pool their resources to pursue a common goal. The Saudi Railways organization awarded $9.4 billion to the Saudi-Spanish Al Shula Consortium to start the next phase of the high-speed railway project. The partnership involved 12 Spanish companies and 2 Saudi companies. The project experienced delays, and the Saudi government threatened the Spanish railway project to speed production or halt the project. Saudi King Abdullah transferred $100 million to a Panama-based offshore fund controlled by King Carlos. Both the Saudi and Spanish kings were investigated for crimes related to this payment. King Abdullah defended it as a thank you gift to Juan Carlos for organizing a religious understanding conference in Madrid. But it gets weirder. During his relationship with Karina, the king established a close relationship with her children. For her son's 10th birthday in 2012, the king took Karina and her children on a safari in Botswana. Though it was presented as a birthday present for her son, Karina believed this was the king's attempt to rekindle their romantic relationship. On April 11, 2012, Juan Carlos shot an elephant dead on the safari. He was proud of this and even took several photos with the deceased animal in front of horrified onlookers. The public was not happy about the elephant hunt. Even fellow hunting enthusiast Karina said she would never kill an elephant. The king also fell and fractured his hip during this trip. The Botswana trip brought much of the monarch's corruption and dishonesty into the limelight. His unfaithfulness to Queen Sofia, unnecessary luxury trips during an economic recession, and visits to countries where Spain had no diplomatic representation. Various corruption cases into the king's son-in-law and daughter were already underway, so a magnifying glass on the royal family only increased after the ill-fated Botswana's trip. Remember, that €100 million gift from Saudi Arabia? Well, now that Juan Carlos was under the microscope after the Botswana trip scandal, it became public knowledge that King Carlos had transferred what remained of that €100 million gift to Karina. Soon after undergoing tumor surgery, he was thinking about who he wanted to benefit from his will. He promised to take care of Karina and her children, but feared that the royal family would not honor his wishes. This shady deal between Saudi Arabia and Spain was then partially transferred to Karina, and by partially we mean €65 million. The transfer caused intelligence officials to believe the king was involved in money laundering or was perhaps trying to hide the money. Further investigations into Karina began. She argued that the money was gifted out of nothing but love. The Spanish people were outraged. As all of this came to light while Spain was amidst another economic downturn from COVID-19, Karina claimed that harassment against her escalated. She was advised not to speak to the press regarding her ex-relationship with the king or the funds he transferred to her. The Spanish Supreme Court opened an investigation into King Juan Carlos as well. In 2014, King Juan Carlos abdicated the throne and was succeeded by his son Felipe. His abdication meant losing immunity to prosecution, but he was still responsible for attending official engagements, trade trips, and travel to the Middle East. The Spanish Supreme Court could only investigate wrongdoings that took place after his 2014 abdication. A Spanish police officer had recorded his conversations with wealthy aristocrats, including a woman believed to be Carina. In the leaked audio recordings, the woman mentioned that King Juan Carlos would often go to Arab countries and return with suitcases full of money, sometimes up to $5 million in cash. She claimed that she saw this money personally and witnessed the king using a machine to count it all. These recordings became the crux of the investigations opened by Swiss and Spanish prosecutors into the king. The king later admitted that he left Spain and was living in the United Arab Emirates. Things got hotter when Carina decided to sue her ex-lover, the king, over harassment and unlawful surveillance from Spain's CNI, the National Intelligence Center. She filed a restraining order that forbade the king from contacting her or coming within 150 meters of her. The king demanded that the $100 million gift transferred to her be returned to him, but Carina refused, causing the king to publicly state that she had stolen it. One lawyer began a petition for the cash to be transferred to the Spanish public healthcare system to benefit healthcare workers who were working overtime for minimum pay during the COVID-19 pandemic. Carina responded, saying she'd leave it up to the Swiss prosecutor. She believed that Spain's National Intelligence Center orchestrated the ongoing investigation and public interest in her personal life and finances under the king's guidance. An English judge investigating Carina's claims of harassment asked the Spanish monarchy to decide whether Juan Carlos is still considered part of the royal family despite abdication. This will determine whether he has immunity against prosecution. Carina argues that she experienced threats, allegations, and harassment over the funds that were irrevocably transferred to her from the king. She says that this has led to deteriorating personal relationships, a need for medical treatment, and immense profitability loss to her business. The monarchy confirms that Juan Carlos is still a member of the royal family. He will enjoy diplomatic immunity, and that will prevent him from facing intense consequences. As of summer 2021, Carina still possessed the money transferred to her by her ex-royal ex-boyfriend. Click here to watch one of these next videos. And let us know in the comments section if Carina should give the money back or not.